All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Afternoon, evening, whichever part of the world you're hearing this training from. Today, we have with us the head of sales for BNP Paribas, Prithpal Singh, who's going to be giving us a quick rundown of everything there is to do with the Aqua Fund NFO that is launched from BNP Paribas. This fund, from what I have looked at first glance, is a very unique proposition, and BNP seems to be getting it right with pretty much most of the NFOs that they come out with, not just from the theme perspective, but from a timing perspective as well. So I'm not quite sure how that happens. But without further ado, I'm going to get straight away to Prithpal, who's going to be walking us through what this presentation is about, how this presentation is going to help us, and get a better sense of everything there is to do as far as the NFO is concerned. So, Prithpal, over to you. Let's get straight into it.
Thanks, Sharat. And thank you, sirs, ladies, and whoever has joined us. Good morning to you. Really appreciate your taking our time today. What I'll do is I'll just put across the screen so that both of all of us can actually see the same content that I'll be talking about. So just give me a second, please. Perfect. Friends, let me begin by saying that whenever we hear about water, the first thing that comes to our mind is scarcity and the problem. I mean, we have a situation wherein, if we have taps in a household, the water doesn't come, right? 24 hours. Even if the water comes, it's highly impure, right? And when I'm talking about, a situation like ours, right? Believe you me, it's actually uh, literally the same all across the globe, whether it's the emerging economy set or the developing world set. I mean, as we keep on going through this presentation, I'll keep on giving you a peek into what exactly is happening as far as water is concerned, what exactly should have happened earlier, but not has not happened so far, because of which there's a huge opportunity that has come across. So from a water as a pain point, wherein every time you discuss pani nahi aa raha, kya kare, to a situation wherein there is a significant investment opportunity as far as water is concerned. So to give you a very very broadest perspective, while 70% of the earth is covered with water, it's basically just full of water is there in seas and oceans, which is brackish water, something that we cannot have. The second set of water source is basically at the poles, which is again actually not as water, but it's actually as ice, so again not potable. In fact, there is only 0.025% of the water that is available is actually accessible water for drinking. That's the challenge, right? But interestingly, even this 0.025% has been there since the time of the dinosaurs, right? Imagine what I mean. We've seen the dinosaurs come and go by. We've seen so many wildlife, wildlife keep on going by, but they've never really felt the shortage of water, except the past 100 years, wherein rampant industrialization has actually led to a lot of pollution of water. It's led to a lot of increased usage of water, and therefore the challenge that we face today. Uh, Nice cities: Cape Town, Mexico, Cairo, Melbourne, Tokyo, Jakarta, London. Normally, these are the cities that are there on the bucket list of people who are traveling, wanting to travel outside. Uh, but interestingly, these cities actually make the cut for a very different reason today. These are the cities which are few of the most populated cities in the world, but they have either run out of water or are about to run out of water. I mean, from an Indian perspective, while we just talked of Bangalore, but I'm sure whether it's Chennai, whether it's Hyderabad, whether it's Delhi, whether I don't know whether you would remember or not, around 2-3 years back, we actually sent across trains full of water to a place called Latur in Maharashtra. Such was the scarcity of water. So while India has a population of nearly 1.35 odd billion, we do require a lot of water. We do not have you know uh, water in plenty. Uh, to give you a perspective on the global water infrastructure, the first two countries are basically a part of the emerging economy. The next two are the part of the developed economy. The story is the same. In India, we all know 80% of the sewage goes untreated directly into the nation's rivers, polluting the main sources. So you just cannot drink water out of a river. China, situation different. 80% of the wells are so contaminated because of chemical pollutants that you cannot have drink water out of those wells. Cape Town is a story that I'm sure all of us have heard about. They started making waves sometime around 2017-18, wherein it was said that Cape Town is going to be shortly run out of water. Uh, 2 years hence, situation is that Cape Town has indeed run out of water and it's no longer making the headlines. The only way in which the city is surviving is water coming either by train to Cape Town, and they're having at least 3 desalination plants made. US, the mecca of globalization and the most industrious nation in the world, uh, we have a challenge there as well. The last time around they actually built water infrastructure was way back between the 1870s and 1920s. Uh, in July 16, a sewage line got ruptured and threw close to 11 million liters of waste on the streets of downtown Los Angeles. And in fact, if you were to recall, last year when there was a blizzard, a snow blizzard, even New York had something similar when there was no light for nearly 24 hours. Uh, with this as the situation, there are lots of growth drivers which are actually driving water infrastructure. So the first one is rising urbanization. Right. This is something that we keep on talking about, and we are all very proud of it, as part of the financial services business. I mean, we love talking about per capita GDP growth, right? But all of that leads to one thing, that is rising urbanization. Now, rising urbanization basically means that, more and more people start staying in the same city. Now, the city is bound geographically at times. Therefore, what you start doing is you start making the city grow vertically. Now, how exactly does it impact water infrastructure is, if you have a ground plus two apartment, it's very easy. You just require, one pipe of say 1.5 to 2 inches and one motor and rooftop water tank on the head, and your water situation is taken care of as far as storage is concerned. But when you have, with rising urbanization, you have residential buildings going up to say 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 stories. It becomes increasingly more and more complex. You can't replicate the same thing, that the pipe going one motor and the overhead tank getting filled up. It requires a very complex water infrastructure. Second thing that happens is, you also have residential buildings and commercial buildings. Now, commercial buildings again have close to at least 7 to 8 to 10,000 people in a particular building, and the complex also requires a very, very different kind of a water infrastructure. And lastly, it's the industrial complexes, right? Those are the ones wherein, which require a lot of piping, right? And to give you a perspective, Reliance Industries, their petrochemical complex in Patal Ganga has 56,000 kilometers worth of pipeline which is laid. Imagine the kind of water infrastructure, pressure gauges, pumps, valves, etc., that is required. So that is what is, one growth driver for water infrastructure. Second is higher standards of living. This is something very interesting. I mean, and this is something that we'll all resonate with. So if you were to recall, at least if I can talk about my childhood, I started off, taking bath from a bucket. A bucket has around say 35 odd liters, right? Then as my parents grew in prosperity, we substituted the bucket for a shower. Normally you consume close to 100 to 150 liters of water. There are a few others who actually became more prosperous, and they actually had a bathtub. A bathtub has a capacity of 500 to 600 liters. So structurally, I mean, we moved from, our consumption of water moved at least 20 times. At an individual level, it doesn't really matter. But just multiply it by at least 3-4 crore people, or maybe possibly say 10 crore people globally. So you get the drift, right? So suddenly there's a lot more direct water consumption that is happening. Now, let me talk about the indirect water consumption that happens because of higher standard of living. Again, when we were, when I was young, we used to recycle a lot of stuff, right? We never were buying a lot of stuff. Nowadays, we are all a part of the use and throw economy. So every time we buy something, whether it's a metal-based thing, whether it's a garment, whether it's food, whether it's wood-based, they all require water. And suddenly, when the life cycle of products that we use comes down significantly, and many more people are doing the same thing, suddenly there's a lot more water that is required across the board, uh, is as indirect consumption as well, you know, which is found lacking. So to make the matters worse, the last time around, the developed world actually had uh, built water infrastructure was sometime around the 1870s and 1920s period. Yes, our infrastructure essentially is water infrastructure essentially is nearly 100, 150 years old, which is why, whenever you go out of town, you'll see that, there's a water pipeline. Invariably, there's a leak with water spewing out. Right. So, as far as India is concerned, we've never really taken a very, very huge concerted effort to uh, to make a water infrastructure. In fact, the first time around, we actually heard about a concerted effort was last year when PM Modi talked about Har Nal Mein Jal. Right. So, essentially meaning that there should be water in every tap. So that's what is our goal as well. Right. So the challenge is so much that what we are looking now is we are looking at nearly $7.5 trillion, which is going to be spent over the next 15 years on water infrastructure. Few other things that will make it imperative is one is regulation. Most countries have signed on to the Paris Climate Accords. India too is a signatory to Paris Climate Accords. As a signatory, India has obligations to control temperature, and in order to control temperature, we have to control the pollutants. In order to control pollutants, we have to ensure that if there's a plant, they have to have an effluent treatment plant. They cannot throw their chemical waste directly into the river. They cannot spew their uh, smoke waste out into the air without purifying it. So those are the challenges and the regulations, the challenges that regulations pose, which require all of which require a significantly better infrastructure. Uh, Another thing that why the regulation is becoming so strong is because of the changing weather patterns. So if you were to look at the top 10 hottest years since 1970, uh, all of them have been post 2000, and we are just into the first 20 years of 2000s. Right. So what happens is that when you have a situation like this, uh, it results only in two weather systems. So, in fact, few weather systems that we earlier saw was climate used to have, there were four climates, right? Summer, winter, autumn, and spring. Today, we do not have autumn and spring. We just have hot weather or cold weather. And hot weather also is searingly hot weather in the 40s, and acutely cold weather for 15 days of the year. So what this has done is this has made the rainfall that used to fall over a period of say 3 to 4 months get crunched into hardly around 15 to 20 days. So when you have the 4 month rainfall getting crunched into 20 days, what happens is it leads to flooding. On the other hand, it also leads to famines, or rather droughts. Now, why exactly does it lead to drought is because, at 20 days volume coming in, the dams cannot hold that kind of water. We have to let go of that water and it all goes into the sea. Now, the thing is, if the dams are not able to hold that kind of water, you are not able to divert that water back into places where there's a drought or a rainfall deficit. In fact, situations such that UN is predicting by 2030, which is hardly 7, 8 years from today, we are looking at a 40% kind of a global deficit. So these are the challenges that are there. To our help is innovation and technology. Incidentally, there's a lot of new technological progress that has happened, which is as of now not touched the water infrastructure. To give you a perspective, Europe, which is the base for diesel cars, last year was the first year wherein electric vehicles outsold diesel vehicles. So we are looking at a significant change in personal mobility that is happening in Europe, as well as US. Obviously, is something that we are seeing a significant change that is happening as far as personal mobility is concerned. In fact, even in power consumption, what we have seen is we have moved away from coal-fired power plants. And if you were to look at all new power plants, either they are solar or they are wind-based power plants. Even hydro is very, very less. But coal, there are very, very few new coal-fired power plants that are coming up. And all these technologies that are available are actually, can be used even in creating of the water infrastructure. This is something which is very interesting. I mean, to give you a perspective, uh, the last time around, any commodity which was financialized was oil, and that happened in the 1970s. And interestingly, since then, what we've seen is that uh, any company associated across the value chain of oil ended up making a significant amount of money for its investors. Now, financialization of water has started only last year. Now we don't really know by how much quantum will the people be able to make money during the value chain. But one thing for sure, whenever there's financialization of any commodity, significant amount of money is to be made. We have what we've done is to give you a better perspective on what the fund is going to do. We have divided the entire water sector into three parts. One is water infrastructure, one is water treatment, and one is utilities. Now, to give you a perspective of water infrastructure is actually divided into the base level, which is companies which actually makes pipes, joints, valves, pumps, pressure gauges, and so on and so forth. Right. The first leg of value addition is companies which are actually using these very equipment to create the water infrastructure in various buildings. As I was talking about earlier, the degree of complexity of water infrastructure exponentially increases as the size of the building increases. The third is the infrastructure services, that is the maintenance services of this water infrastructure. There are maintenance companies as well who actually ensure that the water infrastructure works to the full life. Now, this is for the urban part, wherein we are talking about residential buildings, commercial buildings, and industrial complexes. Now, there's the next part, which is the irrigation. Now, irrigation structurally, what we've been doing is we've been using drain irrigation method, which essentially means that break the side of the canal, have the water come into the field. The seeds which are first in line will tend to get drowned away because of the pressure of the water, and the seeds right at the end will not get enough water. So you will eventually have a significantly low crop yield. But that's the way we've been doing it so far. Uh, the next is, however, we are moving away from drip irrigation to, drain irrigation to drip irrigation. Now, in drip irrigation, what happens is, there are companies like Jain Irrigation who actually ensure that, each and every seed is given the right amount of water. So if the amount of water required is, say, 1 hour and say 3 liters, right? That is what is the amount of water that goes. So what it does, it helps in increasing crop yield significantly. Now that we know water infrastructure companies and their components, let's move to the water treatment. Again, this is divided into three.
One second. I
Yeah.
just had a question. In the previous slide, we spoke about technology and innovation happening in, with reference to, we spoke about electric vehicles and all of that coming in. How is that
Yes.
related to this, in this segment?
Superb question. So, to give you a perspective, so what happens is when you are looking at, say, let's take the case of electric vehicles. Electric vehicles are using batteries, which are very, very interesting, which are getting charged very fast. But the diffusion of charge is the discharge time period is, say, 4 to 5 hours.
Okay.
Now, when you have a solar pump, right, or a battery-driven pump, right, you are being able to pump the water, but you are not using the normal diesel. Right. So that is one immediate technological transfer that happens from, say, technology which is used in electric vehicles to the technology which is used in solar pumps. Then coming to the next aspect of solar and wind farms. Now, electricity is you could actually have a small windmill right on top of within your the rooftop of your factory, or a solar plant, mini solar plant on the top of your factory or your residential complex, and be water or rather electricity neutral. right? So instead of using, tools and pumps which are required to, which require electricity to pump up your water, you are actually using the same things which are operating through solar, and ensuring that you actually have a green environment.
So here what you're referring to is not necessarily direct water, not necessarily investment in the water as a commodity, but in the value chain
Yes,
that will take advantage of economy that is going to be more focused on preserving water.
absolutely, absolutely, you got it absolutely right.
Okay,
In
all right.
fact, if as we go further, I'll talk about what all is included in this, so that will possibly answer the question in greater detail.
Sure, sure.
So coming to the water treatment again is divided into three parts again. One is, the first is the actual builders of the water treatment plant, desalination plants. The second is the guys who actually run the water treatment plants, and the third is the companies which are involved in creating diagnostic tools for testing and monitoring of water on the spot. Right.
Okay.
Now, the last part is the utilities. Now, utilities is basically, utility companies which actually transfer or ferry water from, the aquifer down to your houses and bill you on a monthly basis. In India, we do not really have water utilities which are listed. However, in Bombay, we actually have Adani Electricity, which is a utility company which gets electricity for us. Globally, there are water utility companies, especially in US and UK, or rather Europe, which are listed, which too are a part of the portfolio. So this is the pure play in terms of the aqua. But as we go higher and higher, whether it's treatment or infrastructure, you will see that it serves the needs of very, very diverse industries and not just water alone.
Mm.
Now, when we are looking at a portfolio, we are looking only at global leaders. And when we're looking at those global leaders, what we are seeing is that they have a very, very specialized focus in what they're doing as far as, their craft is concerned. So there would be some companies which are very, very focused on water reuse. Some companies which are, global leaders in leak detection technologies. Some companies which are global leaders in UV disinfection, uh, automated meter reading, desalination, flow measurement. In fact, we also have IT companies which are using big data to try and understand how exactly water is required in various parts, and how exactly can we increase the efficiency or better the pricing of water, so that efficiency is brought about in usage of water. ESG is a bit that we will talk about later, but this is the most important thing. In fact, this will answer a lot of our questions. This is our portfolio creation approach. Uh, the first, so before we start on the portfolio creation, let me just tell you the benchmark. The benchmark for this portfolio is MSCI World. Now, MSCI World has 1,700 companies across the globe. 95% of them are listed in the 95% of them are large cap, and 5% of them are mid cap from the international standards. 70% is nearly in US, and 30% is in the rest of the world, with close to around 25% are based out of Europe. Now, that's the kind of benchmark that we have. Now, if you have to create a portfolio for aqua from this set of 1,700 companies, what we did was we put a first filter of a 20% threshold exposure, whether through revenue or through profitability or through invested capital, that the business should be involved in either environmental products or services. So this is where the scope of the fund becomes much larger, wherein we are not talking about just water alone. We are talking about exposure and through of minimum 20%, whether through profitability, whether through invested capital, or whether through revenue from environmental products and services. So once we put this filter, this 1,700 companies whittled down to close to 256. After this 256 companies we get, that's when we do the fundamental research and valuation. We use something called Viper Analytics, which is a 10-step process, which helps us evaluate companies basis their fundamentals. And we create a 100 stock A list. Now, from this 100 stock A list is the actual portfolio that is created. The thought behind creating the portfolio is that it should have a low turnover approach. That means the companies that we buy we should ideally be holding them in the portfolio for at least 2 to 3 years. Uh, what we are looking at in companies is companies which are growing significantly faster than the rest of the sectoral companies, but the stock price is available at a reasonable price. So these are GARPs limits. Apart from that, whenever we are creating a portfolio, we would not want to have a particular stock increasing more than 3.5 to 4% when we are constructing the portfolio. And when we are creating the portfolio, what we are looking at is macro and thematic overlay. So when we are talking about macros, we are looking at two things. If we see that there's a significantly large investment which is there in the infrastructure creation, we would actually have a lot more focus and a lot more portfolio which will be skewed towards water treatment and water infrastructure. However, if we see the markets are red hot, right, and there could be a correction, we would actually move a significant part of the portfolio towards the utility side, which actually has a steady growth and a steady revenue, and would not get impacted much by whenever the market's correct. So it's actually the safety catch that we have.
So, Pritha, just a quick one. Uh, this disciplined and repeatable approach, is this across BNP Paribas list of funds, or is this particularly with this one?
No, this is a structure that is followed globally within BNP Paribas system. So even within local funds, the same thing is followed. The only
Understood.
difference is
Mhm.
the benchmarks would be different, so the threshold cutoff would be different.
Understood. So for the aqua fund that we're talking about right now, everything that
Yes,
you mentioned in terms of the 1,700 universe and then
yes,
coming down to 256 and then finally listing down to 100 company A
yes,
list, and
yes,
the number of companies that we're going to go and switch in and switch out depending is all pertaining
yes.
to aqua fund.
Correct, correct,
Okay.
correct,
All right.
correct. And the sell side discipline depends on, as I was talking about, the valuation barometer. The second is portfolio risk metrics, which basically means that if at all there's a particular stock that moves beyond 5% of the portfolio, we start shaving off the excess. Macro outlook have already discussed. Engagement outcome basically means that we not only look at the financial aspect through paper, but also we actually keep on having engagements with the corporates where we try to speak to the IRO and the business owners to try and understand how exactly do they expect the business to go. If at all it is in line with our thought process, we keep on continuing holding the stock. If at all, however, there is a change in outlook for whatever reason, we decide to start moving out of that particular stock. So all companies in the portfolio that we have are basically ESG companies. Now, to give you a very interesting example of ESG, I'll have to give you talk about a stock called ITC. It's a company in India. I'm sure everyone's heard of it. So if you recall, ITC around 2-3 years back used to be a 35 PE stock, in line with most of the FMCG players. But today, if you look at it, ITC is a 20 PE stock, while most of the FMCG companies are trading at 60, 70, even 80, 90 PE. So what has changed was something that came out in the annual report that ITC came out with. So in 2018, the number of international fund managers who had tobacco in their exclusion list was only 170. By 2020, which is within 2 years, this number has shot up to 2000. So what we're trying to say here is that companies which are not ESG compliant, right, will increasingly see themselves being a part of the exclusion list of international fund managers, and companies which are ESG focused will increasingly see more and more money coming towards them. So what we do as far as how do we come to the conclusion that our companies are ESG compliant is, one, they definitely get awarded by a whole host of people like Forbes, etc., and various other associations who keep on awarding them on ESG metrics. But apart from that, we also do our own analysis, wherein we analyze governance, which is basically the company that we look at versus the country level. There is a proprietary ranking of countries that we have globally, and we would like to have the company governance rating much better than that of the country level, or at least equivalent. Now, every business that is there has some environmental and social risks, right? But what we do is we analyze them at a company level. Our only intent is to figure out how strong are the environmental and social policies, processes, and incentives. There would be companies who would be wanting to incentivize business more and at the expense of environment. But there would be companies who would actually stop short and say that, okay, this is where the buck stops. Those are the kind of companies that we'll be looking at. Uh, all businesses have some controversies or the other. This is something which is proprietary to us. What we try to do is we try and really look into the controversies from the perspective of how exactly have they been handled. If they've been able to handle the problems properly and and it's like going like hot knife through butter, right? Those are the companies that we like, rather than companies who accost the regulators and try to figure out how exactly can they be out of the situation that has happened. So basis this, we come out with an ESG score. The ESG score for Aqua Fund is nearly 60 versus that of the benchmark at a shade less than 56. The endeavor always is that our Aqua score should be better than that of the benchmark. So UN has 17 sustainable development goals. What we are trying to showcase here is that what all goals of the UN does the fund subscribe to. So if you were to look at the green part, and all of these 17 goals actually have numbers associated with it. Like for example, 6 means clean water and sanitation. 7 means affordable and clean energy. So if you were to look at our fund, you would see that nearly 50% of the fund adheres to the UN Sustainable Development Goals of clean water and sanitation. To give you a brief about the underlying fund, our fund is a Luxembourg-based fund, which has been in existence since 2015. The AUM that it currently holds is $3 billion. The fund comes under delegated fund management, wherein the fund management has been delegated to specialists from Impact Asset Management. Impacts is a company wherein BNP Paribas holds 14% of their equity and manages 40% of their, or rather has garnered 40% of their AUM of $35 billion. This is something that we've discussed. So this is something which will give you a better peek into the portfolio before we get into that portfolio. As I was talking about, if you were to look at the top right-hand box, this is the market cap of the portfolio versus MSCI World. Now, the important thing is that while the fund is thematic, what we've done is when we are constructing the portfolio, the volatility that we've kept is that of the benchmark. Now, why is it important is because what tends to happen is that when you look at a thematic fund, normally you would say that, because it's a theme, I will not want to put the same amount of money as in a diversified equity fund. The reason is because the volatility is very, very different of that of the theme. Here, what we've done is we have ensured that the volatility of the fund is nearly the same as that of the benchmark. Now, typically what happens is when you're wanting to have the volatility the same as that of benchmark, you would like to have the portfolio which is very similar to that of the benchmark. But herein what we've done is our portfolio is very, very different. So if you were to look at versus the benchmark has 96% large cap, while we have a 46% division between large and mid cap. On the geographical basis, again, US is nearly 70% of the benchmark, while we have a 50% allocation towards the US. Europe is 20% on the benchmark, while we have 35% to Europe. And while Asia and Japan, which is roughly around 19 odd percent, we have 16% of our portfolio exposure geographically. To give you a perspective of the water value chain, as I was talking about, water utilities actually has the least amount of. So whenever we talk about the fund, we always talk about which particular part of the entire value chain will get the maximum margin or the maximum accretion of profits. So if you were to look at the water utilities, it is actually at the basis level where the margins are the least. As you move towards water infrastructure companies, you will see that the margins tend to increase. Uh, but as you move towards the water treatment and efficiency, that's where the maximum accretion of profitability lies. So you will always see that the portfolio will have, a very, very significant tilt towards water treatment and efficiency versus water utilities. The bottom right is again the division between cyclical and defensive, right? So what we are actually looking at is at this particular point in time, while it's very, very similar to that of MSCI World, but the important thing is that at this particular point in time, we are equally biased towards both cyclical as well as defenses. Defenses would essentially mean the maintenance and the utilities, and cyclicals would essentially mean the creation of the infrastructure companies. This is the portfolio. Now, the most interesting thing is not on the left hand side of the portfolio, but on the right hand side. Now, if you were to look at all asset classes at this particular point in time, whether it's equities, both domestic as well as international, whether it's bonds, again, both domestic as well as international, or real estate, or IT FANG companies, right? You will see that those are the companies which are the most expensive, right? So, but in our portfolio, what we have is we actually have a portfolio which is relatively inexpensive, having a much higher earnings growth with the volatility as that of the benchmark. So to give you a perspective, let's look at why exactly is our portfolio inexpensive. The most important thing is let's look at the dashes: communication services, consumer staples, which is FMCG companies, energy, which is oil and oil related companies, and financials, which is banks and NBFCs. These are all zero in our portfolio. And these are the ones which are the most expensive sectors across the globe. Now let's look at what exactly do we have. We have a 46% in industrials, which is hardcore industries. We have a 22% in utilities. We have a 11% in materials, which basically are materials which are used by the industrial companies. We have a 6% in information technology, which is basically the big data company that I was talking about. And we have around 4%, around 6.5% in healthcare. This is the chemical and diagnostic companies which are used in the in diagnosing water, and 4% in consumer discretionary. So in all of this, you will actually see that none of these sectors is very, very heavily expensive at this particular point in time. The entire portfolio today is constituting around 54 stocks. On an average, you will see that the stock fluctuation is between 50 and 55. What we've done is post-COVID, there's been a tremendous response from the governments. What we've done is we've divided the entire portfolio into 5 situations, wherein we are looking at market conditions, we are looking at legislation, we are looking at valuation, relative earnings momentum, and therefore the investment view. Now, across all water services, infrastructure, and treatment, we have divided this and realized that post-COVID, the investment condition, rather the investment climate has actually become better than what it was on a pre-COVID level. This is actually, case studies. This is actually called a company fund card, wherein there are 6 parameters that are talked about, wherein we talk about what is the company all about, what is the contribution of this company, who are the beneficiaries of the company, and quantification of the benefit that people derive out of this company's operations, and the risk that what if this company was not there. And the last but not the least, why is it a part of our portfolio? Right. So there are 2 examples that we have. The first one is that of a water supply operator in China, which supplies water to the residents of Hong Kong, which is which does not have rivers of its own and dependent on seawater only. The company has saved and treated close to 2.5 million megaliters of water, and Hong Kong is one of the very few nation states which actually has water recycling to the maximum, and this is the company that is involved in it. And if at all this company was not there, the people of Hong Kong would find it very difficult to live their daily lives. And because it's a market leader and placed to consolidate the water related assets, and its defensive model leads to a stable cash generation, which is why this company is a part of our portfolio. There's another example that's of Agilent Technologies, which is a French company. This is what is the most important thing that I wanted to share with you. This is the fund returns since inception and in US dollar terms. So I'd like to first have your attention towards the last 5 years. Last 5 years, the fund has given a return of 17.21% in dollar terms. 3 years, it's 14%. 24 months, it's 21 odd percent. And last 12 months, it's 35%. Now, the important thing here is to notice that every year, the fund has been able to beat the benchmark returns pretty handsomely in every aspect. Now, the next important thing here I would like you to focus upon is the risk indicators, which is the third one. Now, I was talking about the fund volatility. So, if you were to look at the fund volatility, 1945 versus 18, 1618 versus 1470, and 16.5 versus 15.5. So you will see that across all time periods, the fund volatility is very, very similar to that of the benchmark of 1700 companies. High tracking error essentially means that despite us having a very, very a volatility number which is very close to that of the benchmark, the actual portfolio is very, very different than that of the benchmark. And last but not the least, the valuation that I was talking about, the 12-month 1-year forward PE of the fund is 21.8 times with an earnings growth of 18.6. The benchmark, on the other hand, is 1-year forward earnings of, PE of 20.4 with an earnings growth of 12.8. Now, while it's not strictly comparable, but I'm sure there are a lot of people who actually have this in mind. So to give you a perspective, where exactly would it stack up against Nifty? So last 5 years, Nifty has given a return of around 15%, which means it's given a return which is slightly lesser than that of the fund. The 12-month forward PE of Nifty is roughly around 25, which is it's more expensive than that of the fund. And lastly, the earnings growth is roughly in the range of around 18 to 20%, which is roughly in line with what the portfolio earnings growth is. Now, one more thing that is there is which is very good for at least for Indian investors is the INR returns. So if you were to look at the INR returns, they look much healthier than the dollar returns. The reason why that is happening is because rupee is a structurally depreciating currency. So we normally tend to depreciate close to around 2 to 3% non-linearly over a course of 5-7 years. So structurally, what tends to happen is that if we are investing in rupee terms into a dollar fund, and if the dollar fund let's say the rupee depreciates by 5% while the dollar fund has not given any return, it's given a 0 return, the Indian investors portfolio return will show 5% purely on account of the rupee depreciation.
So, Utpal, do we have any sort of indicator or data statistics that tells us year on year over the last 20, 30 years, how many instances has India been, a depreciating currency over appreciating currency when compared to the dollar? I'm asking that considering how things are shaping up right now.
Sure. You're absolutely right. I think your question is right, but just a number may not help our cause, because what happens is that there are always some triggers that would make the currency depreciate much higher than otherwise, and then there are the lack of those triggers wherein the currency keeps on going at the same level as that of the dollar. So I'll just explain. So when I'm talking about why invest now, there are actually 3-4 reasons. Right. The first reason is actually going back to 2008. Right. So if you remember 2008, we had a global financial crisis. right? The world printed close to $3.5 trillion of money. Now, that $3.5 trillion was actually used by China to upgrade its infrastructure. China used to be a $3 trillion economy, much like the same size of India today. But they created such huge capacities that they were able to catapult themselves to a $11 trillion economy today. Right? That's what happened in 2008. Now, uh, this year, because of COVID, the central banks and governments have printed nearly $9 to $10 trillion, nearly three times the amount of money. And the interesting thing is that the world is actually looking at the Chinese playbook. So if you've seen the news, US has already pledged $1.9 trillion for creation of their infrastructure. Second, President Biden is having another $2.25 trillion plan in mind, the approval for which he's going to be seeking from the Senate in July for upgradation of US infrastructure. So that makes it nearly $4 trillion. Eurozone has already pledged $750 billion, or rather 750 billion euros, I'm so sorry, which is equivalent to nearly $1 trillion, which is going to be going towards upgrading their infrastructure. They call it green initiatives, and I'll tell you what exactly green initiatives also means. India also, on its part, have actually, and the Indian government has talked about 5 lakh crores of investment that is to go into infrastructure for upgradation. Now, whenever we are talking about infrastructure, we are the world is talking about not the erstwhile infrastructure, but it is more talking about sustainable infrastructure, which basically means green objective, which basically means that it is not disruptive for the rest of the environment, right? So invariably, what is going to happen is when we are looking at these three large blocks, whether US, whether Eurozone, even India for that matter, I'm sure there's a lot many more countries who are going to be upgrading their infrastructures. But just these three large blocks, we are going to be seeing a significant uptick in the top line of the kind of companies that are part of the portfolio. Right. So from that perspective, the visibility that we have going forward for the next 5 years is much better than the visibility that we had over the previous 5 years. Right. So that's one aspect, which is why we are wanting to invest now. The second reason, and which is what will possibly answer Sharad's question, is rupee depreciation. Now, rupee depreciation is normally non-linear, but if you would recall, in 2008, rupee used to be trading roughly at around 39.40 to a dollar. But by the time we hit 2012, we'd already started looking at close to around 55, 56. And September 13 crisis, wherein we were a part of Fragile 5, we actually dropped down to 65. Right. So why exactly did that happen? So what happened was, while the world was doing their own quantitative easing, that means printing money of $3.5 trillion, we didn't, leave ourselves behind. We also printed money, and I'll give you our numbers. So our government borrowing program till 2008, or rather before 2008, was less than 1 lakh crores. While there was another nearly 1 lakh crores, which was a part of oil bonds. But post 2008, we started looking at a government borrowing of 4 lakh crores. And this 4 lakh crores over time has swelled to close to around 7 lakh crores before COVID hit. Right. Now, the impact of this 4 lakh crores was that the rupee, which was at 40, slid down to close to around 55, 56 by 2012. Right. So essentially, the rupee started depreciating by nearly 8-9%. Now, coming to what exactly are we doing now? That 7 lakh crores that we were borrowing has jumped up to 12 lakh crores. Right. And RBI again has come in and said that, yes, it is the government is going to be, or rather the government has said that and gotten it approved through the parliament that their borrowing program is going to be 12 lakh crores plus over the next 3-4 years. The fiscal deficit program, wherein they were looking at a fiscal deficit, FRBM Act was 3.5%. It's now close to around, I think, 9%, 9.8 deficit for 2020, 1920, and another 6.5% for 2021. So when we are looking at such kind of money printing that is going to happen, it is going to be accompanying some degree of rupee depreciation. Now we don't expect rupee to depreciate as hard as the 2008 to 2013 era, but definitely it is going to be more or less in the range of around 3 to 4% at least. So, so these are the immediate reasons as to why exactly should one invest both in an international fund as well as an international infrastructure fund and aqua. So the last, which is the risks associated with the fund. Uh, the risks are same as that of any Indian equity fund, except currency risk. Currency risk is normally something that goes in the favor of the investors in India. And last but not the least is the taxation. The taxation for this fund is debt taxation, which basically means that after 3 years, you will start getting indexation benefit. So if you were to come from a 4-year plus kind of a perspective, your taxation incident would possibly be lesser than that of a equity taxation, which is 10% throughout. So with this, I stop the presentation and happy to take questions.
Sure. So, Prithal, can you stop sharing the screen, please, so that we have a conversation? So, Prithal, from a fund strategy, do you all take active cash calls or what is it like?
No, we don't really take active cash calls of more than 5%. So if one was to talk about, that if you're looking at, say, a very, very significant correction, what we would try and do is we would try to move the portfolio more towards the utility side rather than sit out in absolute cash.
Understood. So that is one. Second thing is now that you're going to be collecting, this is a feeder fund. So we're going to be collecting money from India, BNP Paribas, and we're going to be moving to the Luxembourg fund.
Yes.
Are you going to get advantage of how much of an advantage are you going to take because of a new fund offer? Are you going to have all of it invested in one go, or are you going to pace it out? What's it like?
Yes. So unlike a normal Indian equity fund, wherein the fund manager has the discretion of investing, all investors will get the NAV from day one, right? So it makes most sense for us to, give the entire money to the fund managers and make them deploy that money. See, you have to understand that fund is already in existence and has $3 billion. At best, we are looking at, collecting close to around $75 to $80 million, right? Which is, if you were to look at, from the cash holding perspective of 4%, right? It is less than the amount of cash that the fund is holding.
Yeah, awesome. So from a long-term perspective now, from the fund house will have a consumption fund which has done phenomenally well over the last since the time of inception. How do you see this being positioned, and what was the rationale of getting the Aqua Fund introduced?
See, to be very honest with you, what we were seeing was that US was actually struggling with the very, very poor infrastructure that it had, and the fact that they were wanting to go green, right? So that was one of the primary reasons wherein we started looking at the international funds in our stable, and we felt that there is a need for Indian investors to participate in that particular theme. But what transpired was that A, COVID happened, B, the conviction of governments for trying to save their public, and the fact that public hygiene became the single most important criteria across governments across the world. We felt that, okay, this is the time that disproportionate amount of money is going to be going into clean infrastructure, water infrastructure, and therefore we said that this is the right time for us to bring this fund into the markets.
Okay. Do we, from the allocation that we're going to be collecting, do we have any money coming into India at all, or is it insignificant at this time?
Sorry, I didn't get it.
From the entire allocation of the fund that it's got, right? The monies that is allocated. Do we have any exposure to India at all at this time?
No, at this particular point in time, there's unfortunately no exposure to India because there's just a handful of companies. So to give you the numbers, Jain Irrigation as far as drip irrigation is concerned, Astral Poly and Finolex as far as and Syntex as far as pipes is concerned, Shakti Pumps as far as pumps is concerned, possibly ion exchange as far as water filtration is concerned, but they are very, very small companies, right? They will not be able to, bring about a significant dent. And when the fund size is typically large, right, at close to 20 or 1,000 crores, right, and you can have, not more than say 50, 55 stocks, you would ideally like to have a company wherein, it's possibly say at least having a market cap of roughly around say 15 to 20 or 1,000 rupees, if not more.
Understood.
Which is where these companies will fall short.
Cool. One more question here. Considering the fact that we've got about 20% or 22% of the portfolio going to be utilities, so these companies are going to be there forever, right? Now,
Yes.
from a technological standpoint, in utilities, especially with water, I see only that 30 or 35 odd percent where there will be significant amount of margin to be made, considering the fact that it's going to be innovation and leadership. So,
Yes.
are we going to be able to sustain the kind of alpha that the fund has been creating now and for at least another 10, 15 years?
So actually a very, very good question, because what has happened is if you were to actually go back around say 5-6 months, you would actually see that the utility component was close to say 13-14%, right? Because the markets have actually ramped up pretty strongly, we've actually increased the utility component to close to 20 odd percent. So it's not that it's always fixed at say 20%, but as I said that when we are looking at the markets becoming red hot, the utility component actually increases. So that's what we've done.
Okay, so this is going to be predominantly a fund that is going to be investing anything and everything to do with water, not necessarily clean energy perspective.
No, it's actually the other way around. So while the fund says that it is focused on aqua, right? But the threshold is 20% in environmental products and services. Environmental products and services. To give you an example, like for example, there's a filter manufacturer, right? Now the filter manufacturer is making filter for water companies as well as air purifying companies. In fact, one of the largest companies, this is very interesting. One of the largest companies that we have in our portfolio is Fisher Gordon. Now, Fisher Gordon, their majority business is actually they make front suspensions for Mercedes, Audi, and BMW.
Interesting. Okay.
Right. But they also have a water. They also make water filters, right? Air filters, right, and water filters. So their air filters and water filter business is close to 25%.
Understood.
Right, which is why they're a part of our portfolio. So you'll see which is why industrials is nearly 50%. You'll see a diverse set of companies. Most of these companies have turnovers of anywhere between 2 and 5 billion, right? And serving interests across a range of industries.
So you're saying is a company that we're looking at should have minimum exposure of 20% or more in energy, in clean energy business.
Yes, environment business. Again, another example I'll give you, Agilent Technologies. Right now, Agilent Technologies is a diagnostic tools company. Right. So their diagnostic tools are taken by more than 2 lakh labs across the world. All pharma companies, all API companies use their diagnostic tools. But their diagnostic tools are also used by all water treatment companies. Therefore, Agilent Technologies, makes the cut in aqua. Okay.
So it's just I like to understand why is it called an aqua fund? Because from just until unless someone listens to a presentation with this much of intent and time invested, the perception is going to be only in companies pertaining to water. So why that name and not probably, let's say, a clean energy fund or something?
Very good question. So for that, you'll have to remember that UN SDG goals slide that I showed, wherein there was so nearly 50% of the portfolio's revenues are coming through companies which are associated with aqua, which is why it is called aqua.
Understood. Okay. And at this point in time, how is the portfolio position? They're completely large cap oriented, or are we mid cap?
50-50.
50-50, huh?
Yeah, 50-50. So but mid cap is also $10 billion, and large cap is $10 billion and above.
So from that standard, it's a mega cap. It's not a mid cap.
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. And this is all growth companies. We are the portfolio constructors of growth.
Yes. Correct.
Awesome. So Prithpal, I think this is all the questions I had for you. I think it's been a pretty, pretty, impactful 45 odd minutes that we've gone about deep diving into all the kind of data that we can. Anything else that you'd like to probably tell to your existing or possibly new investors that are going to be coming via this fund?
Your voice is echoing, so I didn't hear
Sorry.
that.
What I was saying was, Prithpal, do you have anything that you would like to tell to your existing investors of BNP Paribas or future
Yes.
investors that are going to be coming in because of this fund? Anything at all
Yeah.
that you would like to say as
So
a sign off?
so two things that I'll say is that while today we are looking at some very huge numbers as far as COVID is concerned, right? And we are seeing that maybe the markets are very richly valued. What one has to look at is that whenever these kind of challenges come about, the governments tend to step up, right? The central banks tend to step up, and when they step up, government is the single biggest spender, right? So imagine a situation wherein suppose I'm say getting say an income of say 10 lakh rupees, right? If my income was to grow from 10 to say 1 crore, right? What will I do? I'll spend, right? Significantly. Once I start spending, right? My spend is income for somebody else, right? And therefore the money multiplier keeps on working, right? That's what the government is doing. The government's income, which was 7 lakh crores, has moved from 7 to 12 lakh crores. This is 5 lakh additional rupees, 5 lakh crores of additional rupees, which is actually going to be pumped into the economy, wherein, plentiful
So
people are going to be.
income, you're talking about money being printed. It is not income as in income from taxes and.
No. See, government owns the printing press, right? If they
Got
are
it.
printing the money, right, it has to be spent. So suppose let's take the let's roll it out. The government spends money in making roads. The road contractor gets the revenue, right? He's also, because he's buying more material, he's actually having to buy more raw material. Again, their pat and his income, and therefore
snowball
it's a
effect.
circle. Yeah, it's an avalanche effect. Absolutely right. Right. So structurally, what starts happening is, when you have this kind of thing happening over the next 2-3 years, right, the kind of earnings growth that you'll see, whether for domestic or for international companies, is going to be humongous. You just have to be at the right sectors, and at this particular point in time, do not look at the long term averages. Array, market is at 25p. At last time I saw at 20p, the market corrected, so I need to really take down my equity exposure. These are not normal times. You can take these calls say 1-2 years down the line, but at this particular point in time, it's like you are sitting on a roller coaster which is about to start. So just hold tight, wait for 2 years, and you'll see a lot of money being made.
You're a sales guy at the end of the day, Prithpal. All right, Prithpal. So thank you very much for taking the time and giving us the kind of insights as far as the fund is concerned. And all the best
Sure.
for the NFO, and hopefully this NFO is going to be adding in some more numbers onto the BNP Paribas asset base for at least India, because obviously we're talking about pocket change for the already existing $3 billion fund. So thank you once again, Prithpal, and we'll talk to you real soon.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks a lot for taking the time. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And please stay safe. Cheers.
So.